Welcome to 21st Sports Recap and Reaction for the Green Bay Packers at the Detroit Lions in their Week 13 matchup played December 3rd, 2015 on Thursday Night Football. So we're going to go over every possession between these two NFC North Division rivals. We're also going to go over the stats and give our breakdown and analysis of this game. And what a crazy game this was. Started off, it was all Detroit. They were up 20-0, and then the Packers came back. But starting off, the Packers would get the ball first, and they would end up punting after 5 plays. As the Detroit defense was playing strong early on, and so then the Lions would take over for the first time in this game on their own 32 after the punt, with a little less than 13 minutes left in the first. Namir Abdullah made a big run, 12 yards to pick up a first down. And then on 2nd and 9 from the 45, Calvin Johnson Jr. picked up 20 yards on a reception. And that moved the ball into Green Bay territory at the 35. And then the Lions would end up getting a penalty, and they would end up having to settle for a 51-yard field goal attempt by Matt Prater. And so Matt Prater kicked the field goal, and it was 3-0 Detroit over Green Bay. So 51-yard field goal for the Lions as they put the first points on the scoreboard. So now Green Bay would take over after the touchback on their own 20. The Packers would get called for a face mask penalty on first down, and they would end up having to punt the ball after 4 plays. So they were faced with a 4th and 2 on their own 28. They punted the ball, and now the Lions would take over for the second time in this game, this time on their own 24. They were faced with a 3rd and 5 from the 29. Golden Tate picked up the first down with a 12-yard reception that brought the ball to the 41. And then Stafford made a clutch play as he ran for a first down that brought the ball into Green Bay territory at the 47 as he picked up 12 yards on the ground on the scramble. Then Amir Abdullah ran it 36 yards all the way down into the red zone at the 11. And then on 3rd and 2 from the 3, Matthew Stafford hits Eric Ebron. They went to like a 5-wide set, and the tight end was wide open. Nobody was covering him. It was a touchdown for Detroit, a 3-yard touchdown pass by Stafford, the first touchdown in this game. Prater added the extra point, and it was 10-0 Detroit over Green Bay. So now the Packers would take over after the touchback. They're on their own 20. And on 2nd and 8 from the 22, Rodgers looking for James Jones. It goes through his hands, and Glover Quin comes up with it. And he brings it back 24 yards all the way to the Green Bay 17 as the Lions would start this possession in the red zone. It would only take them one play to get into the end zone as Matthew Stafford threw his second touchdown pass of the game. This one, a 17-yard reception by Calvin Johnson Jr. Megatron making an incredible one-handed grab, dragging the toe over on the right sideline there in the end zone for the score. Prater added the extra point, and it was 17-0 Detroit over Green Bay with just a minute left in the first quarter. So the Lions up 17-0 after 1. As the Packers would end up bringing the first quarter to a close on their next possession. They had some struggle early on, but they would end up bringing the ball to midfield, and they actually started the second quarter in Detroit territory. They got down into the red zone, but then they got backed up as Rodgers was sacked by Taylor on a 3rd and 6, and so Mason Crosby would come out to attempt a 41-yard field goal, but it hit the left upright, so it was no good. And so the Packers still had a 0 up on the scoreboard, and the Lions were still up 17-0. So now Detroit would take over after that missed field goal on their own 31, but they would go 3 and out as the Green Bay defense finally stopped the Lions, as the Lions had scored on their first 3 possessions of this game. So it's the first punt for Detroit with about 11.5 minutes left before halftime. But the Detroit defense would come up big yet again, as they had been so far in this game, and they came up with a stop. They forced the Packers to go 3 and out. They actually had a fumble as Taylor sacked Rodgers for the second time here in the first half. and he actually forced the fumble, but it was recovered by Green Bay, so out came the punting unit, and they punted the ball to the Lions. The Lions started with the ball on their own 19, but they would go 3 and out for the second consecutive possession after having scored on their first 3 possessions of the game. So the Lions would punt the ball to the Packers. They would take over on their own 25 with less than 7 minutes left before halftime. They would bring the ball up to midfield, but then a penalty for holding put them back into their own territory, and their drive would stall, and they would end up having to punt the ball on a 4th and 22 from their own 38. So now Lions would get the ball on their own 20 after the punt, and they would go 3 and out for the 3rd straight possession. So starting off with 3 scores on their first 3 possessions, now 3 straight 3 and outs as the Packers defense had clamped down, and the Lions weren't getting much production. Of course, Clinton Dix had a sack on 3rd and 6. They would end up forcing that punt on 4th down. So now the Packers would take over with just over 2 minutes left before halftime on their own 28. They'd bring the game to the 2-minute warning, but they would go 3 and out as the Lions defense came up with a big stop as they were keeping them shut out and off the scoreboard here in the first half. So the Lions would take over after the punt. They had the ball on their own 10-yard line, backed up against their own end zone with a little over a minute and a half left before halftime, and they would end up punting after 4 plays. They did get a first down, but they would only get 1 first down, and they ended up punting with just about less than a half minute left before halftime, and instead of going for a Hail Mary at the end of the first half, Aaron Rodgers took a knee. So this game went to halftime 17-0, with the Lions totally in control in the first half. The Packers did not convert any 3rd downs in the first half. They were 0 for 7 on 3rd down. They were struggling. It actually, in the first half, it looked like these two teams had switched uniforms. And that's kind of how it would look in the second half, as if they switched uniforms at halftime. Although with the first possession of the second half, the Lions would actually score. They would get the ball first. They started off on their own 18. They were moving the ball down the field. They got into field goal range. They were in the red zone, but they weren't able to get into the end zone. And so now Prater would come out to attempt a 34-yard field goal. And now it was 20-0 Detroit over Green Bay with 9 minutes still left in the third quarter. Now, this is when the Packers finally responded and finally put some points on the board. They would start off on their own 25, and on a 3rd and 10 from the 25, Rodgers went to Rodgers, the quarterback, to the tight end, and so it was a 26-yard catch that brought the ball to the Detroit 49. Then on 2nd and 6 from the 45, Crockett ran for 12 yards. That brought the ball to the 33. Rodgers dumped one off to Starks. He picked up 25 yards, and now it's a first down in the red zone at the Detroit 8-yard line, 1st and goal. And then we had a crazy play where it was a handoff, and it was fumbled by Starks, and then Randall Cobb ends up coming up with it in the end zone. He jumps on the ball, and so a fumble, and he fumbled it forward. He was being tackled, and then Randall Cobb comes away with it. He jumps on it in the end zone, and it's a touchdown for the Packers. So a crazy play. It was, you would have thought it was Halloween, not Christmas time. Of course, Thanksgiving just happened last Thursday, but in between the two holidays, like I said, it was just a crazy, crazy play to see the first touchdown for the Packers. Crosby had the extra point, and so now it was 20-7 as Green Bay trailed by 13. So still trailing by 2 scores. And then the Lions, on their first play after the touchback on the kickoff, Stafford was sacked by Julius Peppers. Peppers stripped the ball from Stafford, and Ryan jumps on it. Jake Ryan from Michigan, a former Wolverine, with the recovery. And so now Green Bay would take over on the Detroit 12-yard line as they would start this possession in the red zone. And on 3rd and 6 from the 8, Aaron Rodgers hits Davante Adams for the 8-yard touchdown. And Mason Crosby adds the extra point. And now it's 20-14 as the Packers score 2 touchdowns in less than 2 minutes here in the third quarter with 4 minutes still left in the third. with the extra point by Crosby, 20-14, a 6-point game now after having been down by 20 just 5 minutes earlier. So now the Detroit Lions would take over after the kickoff on their own 22, and they would end up moving the ball up towards midfield, but they would have to punt from their 46, their own 46, on a 4th and 1. So they punted the ball on 4th and 1. Now Green Bay would take over on their own 18. They would bring the third quarter to a close. So you open up the fourth on their own 31 with a first down. But then they lost a couple yards. They lost 4 yards on a run. And then an incomplete pass brought up 3rd and 14. And Rodgers was sacked by Ziggy Ansah. So Ezekiel Ansah with the sack. And so the punting unit came out. And so after 5 plays on this possession, the Packers would punt from their own 18. So now the Lions would take over on their own 42 near midfield with about 13 and a half minutes left to play in this game. And they would end up bringing the ball into Green Bay territory. They end up going back with a penalty, but they kept moving forward. And they would end up getting close to the red zone, but not quite. And their drive would stall on the 24. And Prater came out to attempt a 42-yard field goal. It was up. It was good. And so now it was 23-14 with just over 7 minutes left to play. The Lions up by 9. So now Green Bay would take over after the kickoff on their own 16. Now, Rodgers would scramble for 6 yards. Starks picked up 3. It was 3rd and 1. And an incomplete pass would bring up 4th down. So now it's 4th and 1 with just under 6 minutes left to play. They're on their own 25. And the Packers go for it. So the Lions, when they were on their 46, they had punted on a 4th and 1. But here, the Packers down by 9, needing 2 scores in less than 6 minutes. They go for it. And they don't run, they pass the ball. Aaron Rodgers throws it to Randall Cobb, and he picks up 16 yards on the right sideline. So a big play there, extending the drive. It's now on the 41. They would then be faced with the 2nd and 6 from the 45. Rodgers dumps it off to Starks. He picks up 7 and a first down in Detroit territory at the 48. And then we end up with a false start. And so then after the false start, Rodgers went to the tight end. He picks up 11. And now they're right there in the red zone at the 16. And then we end up with a 3rd and 11 from the 17 after they had lost a yard on a little short pass play. But an incomplete pass brought up 3rd down, and on 3rd down from the 17, 3rd and 11, Aaron Rodgers ends up, he's looking for a target. It was originally a pass play, but he takes off, and he runs it on the left side, and he gets into the end zone. Aaron Rodgers runs in for the score, and it's now a 2-point game after the extra point by Crosby, after the 17-yard touchdown run by Rodgers with just over 3 minutes left to play. And it's Detroit 23, Green Bay 21. So now a 2-point game after that touchdown. Amazing play by Aaron Rodgers, very heads up. Even though they were down 20-0, Rodgers was playing pretty good, and he just kept going. He just kept competing. Now he had the Packers within 2 points. So now after the touchdown, there's a touchback on the kickoff. And so the Lions would take over on their own 20. And Detroit, at this point, I just thought that their play calling was kind of suspect. They just kept running the ball. They did get a big pass play from Stafford to Jones on 3rd and 12 from their own 18 as they were put in a crazy position there. Jones comes up with a 29-yard reception to make it a first down at the 47. And then they ran the ball to bring the clock to the 2-minute warning. And at this point, Green Bay was out of timeouts, so Detroit just keeps running it. And the thing with this is that every time that the Lions ran the ball, you knew they were going to run the ball. I don't know why they wouldn't try to disguise the run in some way, shape, or form. But they were not having much success on the ground all game. And they were trying to kill the clock here. But I thought it was kind of questionable, at least in terms of the formations that they were running the ball out of. But but they ended up punting the ball. They got the clock down all the way to 30 seconds, and they used their second timeout. So the Packers didn't have any timeouts. The Lions had run the clock down as much as possible, but instead of really trying to gain any ground, they just kept running the ball, losing yards, and so now they would punt from their own 44. So the punt took 7 seconds off the clock, and so now the Packers would take over on their own 21 with 23 seconds left to play. So an incomplete pass on first down, an incomplete pass on second down. It was some nice defense by the Lions, as Diggs made a really good play. Abdul Quddus also made a really good play. And so now it's 3rd and 10 on the 21. Rodgers goes to Jones, and so he picks up 3 yards, and then it was just crazy. They kept lateraling the ball. It ends up in Rodgers' hands, though, back with the quarterback, Aaron Rodgers. And so then it's like, this game is over. There's no time on the clock, but there's a phantom face mask call against Taylor as he kind of whipped Rodgers to the ground. If you saw it just in real time, it looked like a face mask. I thought they were going to call it. As soon as I saw the flag, I was like, oh, it's a face mask. But when they showed it in slow motion, you saw that he actually did not. He did not actually grab his face mask. It was just the way he kind of grabbed him, and he got a piece of his shoulder pad kind of, through the jersey. But he just kind of whipped him, and with the force of just his hand touching him, and just kind of, he's so strong, it made Rodgers' head kind of whip, and then he landed kind of face first, and now his face mask and his helmet was all down. It looked like a face mask, but he never actually grabbed his face mask. But the game cannot end on a defensive penalty. So the face mask call meant this game would get one more play, one final play, no time on the clock. And so now it was a first down on the Green Bay 39. The Packers needed 61 yards, down by 2 points. There's a field goal doesn't come into it. If they were going to kick a field goal at that point, it would have been a 78-yard field goal. But instead, they needed 61 yards for the Hail Mary. Rodgers scrambling around under pressure. He launches the ball, and Ricardo Rodgers somehow, some way, puts himself in the position. He actually, even with the ball in the air, he looked to turn to see where everyone was, and he put himself kind of like boxing out for a rebound in basketball. He goes up, he's 6'4", he grabs it in front of everybody. It was crazy. It was like there was a wall of like Green Bay receivers, and all the defenders were in the end zone, and somehow Rodgers comes up with it. Rodgers to Rodgers, 61-yard touchdown on the final play of the game, and the Green Bay Packers win 27-23. Aaron Rodgers just took a knee at the end of the game as they had to line up for the extra point, but he just takes a knee, and so the Packers are now 8-4 with the 4-point victory, 4-2 on the road this season. The Lions are now 4-8, 3-4 at home, as their 3-game winning streak comes to a close at home against the Packers. And the Packers now, that's a huge win for Green Bay. They're a half a game behind Minnesota in the North. Detroit's pretty much all but done for it. They entered this game with a possibility, an outside shot of maybe making a wild card. They would have pretty much had to win out. But now at 4-8, they're pretty much eliminated from the playoffs. But Green Bay that gets a huge win on the road in the division, and they're going to be rooting for the Seahawks in Minnesota come Sunday. And if the Seahawks can beat the Vikings, these two teams will be tied once again. But what a crazy finish. What a crazy game. And this has kind of been the story of the Lions season. They've had a lot of close games, which shows that they're within reach of being a good team. They've had a tough schedule. The thing is, though, is that they started off so strong. They've done this in other games, too, where they start off really strong in the first half. They get out to a big lead. Even they added another 3 on their first possession of the second half to make it 20-0. But then they just kind of fall apart at the end. It's like for some reason, they just stop, when they get the lead, they stop being creative with their play calling. They start trying to run the ball, but they're the worst team in the league when it comes to running the ball. And there's times where Amir Abdullah was looking good, but then they seemed to limit his touches in the second half. He was having success in the first half, but then they just decide not to give him the ball, and then they pretty much decide to abandon the pass as well, where they were having success, and they just weren't being aggressive on the pass. And then all their runs, they're going to run when they go into certain formations where they're running formations. I don't know why wouldn't they just, out of a shotgun, try a halfback draw maybe once in a while, especially when they were forced to pass the ball and they pick up the big, third down with Jones there to extend that drive, and then they just decide, run. I know you got to run off the clock, but I was even thinking at that point, I'm like, you don't ever want to give Aaron Rodgers any time on the clock. And if Aaron Rodgers, it doesn't matter how much time's on the clock, he doesn't need timeouts. The guy's a competitor. He plays the full 60 from start to finish, whistle to whistle. He does not quit, no matter what. And if given the opportunity, given the chance, he makes magic happen. That's what he does. I mean, the guy is just unbelievable. Even in this game, when they were struggling early on, Rodgers was making some crazy plays, but just the receivers were having trouble for whatever reason coming down with the ball. They weren't securing their catches. They weren't really doing their part, but they stepped up in the second half. And, of course, mainly the tight end, Richard Rodgers, he came up huge. Even he had a big day all around. He was making some very clutch catches, getting some first downs, extending drives. He was doing his part for sure. As some of the other receivers, they were, not really getting it done. You can see they're definitely been missing Jordy all year, and we're missing him in this game, but in the end, they were able to get it done. And their defense, after letting the Lions score on those first 3 possessions, they just clamped down, and they did not let the Lions back in the end zone, even though they let up the 2 field goals in the second half. That was enough to give Rodgers the opportunity to be within striking distance when it came down to the final closing moments of this game. And then, of course, controversy as well. I mean, we've seen this in other games with the Packers, but the controversy, with the phantom face mask call. And the thing is, the ref, when they see it, they're seeing it in real time. They don't have the advantage of, slow motion replay as the play's happening. I mean, when it happened, it looked like it was a face mask. But only upon review, when you saw the replay, you saw, no, it actually wasn't. The Lions kind of got screwed there. But I'll tell you, the Packers needed this game, and they won it. And the thing is, you can't really leave it in the hands of the refs, because if you're in that position, well, you're kind of in a position to lose. Whereas if you want to win a game, you got to close strong. And the Lions did not, but the Packers defense, they definitely stepped it up. And they definitely shut things down. And Aaron Rodgers, and then, of course, Richard Rodgers came up huge. But let's look at the stats. Aaron Rodgers, 24 for 36, 273 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. And he also had 27 yards on the ground off of 4 carries and a rushing touchdown. So 3 total touchdowns for Aaron Rodgers in this game. He's doing it from both facets. And other than Rodgers, he was actually the leading rusher for Green Bay with the 27 yards. Because Detroit was playing some excellent defense in this game, but it just wasn't enough to stop Superman Rodgers, Mr. Discount Double Check. But Richard Rodgers, the tight end, 8 receptions for 146 yards and a touchdown. James Starks had 5 receptions for 45 yards. He also had 9 carries for 15 yards, which gave him 60 total yards in the game. Randall Cobb, 4 catches for 29 yards. And Davante Adams had 4 catches for 21 yards and a touchdown. And for the Lions, Matthew Stafford, 23 for 35, 220 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. Amir Abdullah, 13 carries for 67 yards. Stafford also had 2 carries for 22 yards. Golden Tate had 8 receptions for 63 yards. Calvin Johnson Jr., 3 receptions for 44 yards and a touchdown. Jones, 2 receptions for 37 yards. Theo Riddick, 5 receptions for 27 yards. And he also had 1 rush for 4 yards. Joique Bell had 2 catches for 25 yards and 8 carries for just 5 yards. And that was the thing, I mean, not to knock on Joique Bell, but, you know, Amir Abdullah was having so much success in the first half, and then in the second half, they're like, yeah, let's just keep giving it to Joique Bell. 8 carries, 5 yards. You know, not like, why would we give it to Amir Abdullah or anything? But let's look at the kickers. And in this game, Mason Crosby 0 for 1 on the field goals, that one that hit the upright, but he was 3 for 3 on the extra points. And Prater 3 for 3 on the field goals, 2 for 2 on the extra points, as he was perfect. We look at the defense in this game. Clinton Dix had a sack. Julius Peppers had a sack as well, and that forced fumble. And Micah Hyde had a sack as well. And of course, Jake Ryan was a tackling machine. He also recovered that fumble that was forced by Peppers. But he was actually having a pretty big game, Ryan, for the Packers. And for Detroit, Abdul Quddus, he was getting a lot of tackles too. He also had a forced fumble. He was breaking up a lot of passes. Glover Quin had that interception. Ziggy Ansah had a sack. Devin Taylor had 2 sacks. Of course, those were in the first half, and then he got called for that phantom face mask. But he also had a forced fumble as well. And Tapp had a forced fumble for the Lions also. And then we look at the team stats. 19 first downs for the Packers, 17 first downs for the Lions. We look at third downs. The Lions 6 for 16, 37% conversion rate on third down. And the Packers 3 for 12, 25% conversion rate. Both teams went for it once on fourth down. They both were 100% on fourth down. Total net yards, 313 for the Packers, 306 for the Lions. On the ground, the Lions actually netted 101. The Packers just 67 yards netted on the ground. And through the air, the Packers netted 246. Aaron Rodgers was sacked 3 times, losing 27 total yards. And for Detroit, they netted 205 through the air, as Stafford was sacked 3 times for a total loss of 15 yards. And the penalties really cost Detroit in this game. 9 penalties, 108 penalty yards. The Packers had 7 penalties for just 55 penalty yards. So just 2 more penalties for the Lions, but twice as many penalty yards. And then when it came to the fumbles, the Lions had a fumble which they lost. That was when Peppers stripped Stafford. And then the Packers, although they fumbled it 3 times, they recovered their fumbles. They did not turn the ball over on those fumbles. They only had the 1 turnover, that interception, which really wasn't Rodgers' fault. I mean, at least he made the throw. It was a little high, but it hit Jones in the hands, so he did have an opportunity to catch it. As you can see, he was visibly upset that Jones didn't come down with it. But we look at the red zone, 3 for 4 for the Packers, 75% in the red zone, 2 for 3 for Detroit, 66%, and the Lions 33 minutes and 4 seconds of possession, and the Packers 26 minutes 56 seconds. So it's a crazy game, and this is kind of games where, you know, the teams that are winners, they win. They find a way to win. The teams that lose, they find a way to lose. Although the Lions, it's been a rough year, and they just haven't really been closing out in the second half, and they just aren't playing well with the lead. Of course, a lot of that comes to the play calling. It's the coaches. They said, in the second half, they abandoned everything that was working for them in the first half. They stopped giving Abdullah the ball. They start giving it to Joique Bell. They get uncreative with their play calling. But on the other side, the Packers defense just shutting down the Lions, and Aaron Rodgers just does not quit. He don't give up. He had no kind of support from the running game. Eddie Lacy only had 4 yards, but Aaron Rodgers just willed the Packers to victory. he just wouldn't stop. He just kept it moving, and the defense was coming up with big plays. Of course, they scored those 2 touchdowns in less than 2 minutes. Of course, Julius Peppers with that strip that allowed him to set right up there in the red zone and get the touchdown, to get that second one there in that stretch. And then the final play of the game, it was like a miracle if you're a Packers fan. It was heartbreaking if you're a Lions fan. But either way, it was an instant classic. But let me know what you think in the comments section below. Definitely interested to read your thoughts and opinions. Thank you very much for listening. It's greatly appreciated. I hope you're having a good day and had a great week, and have a great weekend, and enjoy all the sports.